everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Shadows of the Moon podcast, where we talk about everything from aliens to metaphysics, cryptids to cover-ups, witchy stuff to awakenings, and of course, the paranormal. And on the YouTube side, we throw some tarot in. And we do it all with you at shadowsofthemoon.net. Just head on over there, click the links, and go to your favorite podcast listener app. I look forward to seeing you there.
And now, coming to you live from Alaska, here's a woman that has been around many moons and has seen many shadows. Here's your host, Shadows of the Moon.
Hello everyone, I am Shadows from shadowsofthemoon.net. I hope all is well with everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Talk, where we're talking all things paranormal, from haunted places to creepy stories to your stories. Today we are talking about haunted houses. There may be some that you've heard, others that you have not heard of, but could be worth exploring. And I ask you, if you feel like it, if you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button and hit the little bell icon to get notified of whenever I publish a new video or go live. We're a great little community over here that loves to share some witchy stuff, paranormal, ufology, and conspiracy theories, and basically just have fun. Thank you so much for listening, watching, subbing, following, and liking. And remember, if you'd like to share your stories or pictures for the show, head on over to shadowsofthemoon.net, click on podcast or podcast talk, which is our forum where everything we talk about on the podcast, and either leave a post or an email or a voicemail, and I'll share them on the show. So let's go ahead and get started on why you're here, and that would be for the stories and encounters. The first place we're talking about is the Ackley House in Nyack, New York. It's nicknamed the Ackley House after its one-time occupants, the Ackley family. This classic Queen Anne sits on the Hudson River across from Sleepy Hollow, New York. The many ghosts who roam the halls of one La Veda Place were nothing but friendly, though they were active enough to inspire the matriarch, Helen Ackley, to write a national article about them in Reader's Digest. The article gained enough momentum that the house became a regular stop on a local ghost tours, which ended up by having some not so great ramifications when it came time to sell the home in the late 1980s. After some time on the market, the Stembrowski family put down a down payment and were ready to relocate from Manhattan when a contractor made a passing comment about the home's haunted reputation. The Ackleys then found themselves entangled in a legal battle over whether or not they should have disclosed the haunted nature of the house. In a landmark decision, now referred to as the Ghostbusters ruling, Ackley House was deemed haunted by the New York Supreme Court, and the buyers were able to pull out of the sale while also getting half of their down payment back. So that was the landmark case which now New York says that you have to disclose whether your home is haunted or not when selling it. So one La Veda Place has since been a home to several celebrities, including musician Ingrid Michaelson. Pretty interesting. Number 2 on my list is Mercer Williams House in Savannah, Georgia. Located across from one of Savannah, Georgia's most famous and pristine squares, Monterey Square in the city's historic district, the Mercer Williams House dates back from 1860. And in the 1970s, fame antiques dealer Jim Williams restored the house to its former glory after years of neglect. This house has played host to 3 untimely deaths, including that of 11-year-old Tommy Downs when he fell off the roof in 1969, the 1981 fatal shooting of Danny Hensford by Williams, and Williams himself when he died in the same room as Hensford less than a year after being acquitted of Hensford's death in a 4th trial. If the story sounds familiar, it's probably because you recognize it from the best-selling book Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. Much like the rest of the city, the home was supposedly built right on top of unmarked graves. Rumors about the crime and ensuing ghost stories continue to swirl to this day. Number 3 is Grey Gardens in East Hampton, New York. The grand East Hampton estate, known as Grey Gardens, has a fascinating history with many ups and downs. The 4 acres of land the home now sits on is in the Georgica Beach section of East Hampton, one of the most expensive regions in the world, and it was purchased by a wealthy couple in 1895 before the home was built in the early 1900s. By 1913, it was sold to the president of the coal company, whose wife, Anna Gilman Hill, imported ornate concrete walls from Spain to enclose in the garden. Now, the house was called the Grey Gardens because of the color of the dunes, the cement garden walls, and the sea mist. Later, in 1923, the home was sold to Edith Bouvier Beale, the parental aunt of Jackie Onassis Kennedy and Lee Resdawil and her family. After a series of misfortunes and financial losses, the home fell into disrepair and overrun by cats and raccoons, and perhaps something else not of this realm, particularly because Big Edie Beale and her daughter, Little Edie Beale, couldn't afford to maintain the mansion on their own. The woman's story and star power were made famous in a 1975 documentary by Albert and David Maysles. Big Edie held onto the property until her death in 1977, and her spirit is said to remain at Grey Gardens, watching over the house. Among the believers is author and journalist Sally Quinn, best known for her column in the Washington Post, who purchased the home from Little Edie in 1979, and she swears that it's haunted. Number 4, the Lemp Mansion in St. Louis, Missouri. Starting strong with a very scary house, the Lemp Mansion in St. Louis, which is known to be one of the most haunted places in America due to tragic history. The 33-room home was built in the 1860s by William Lemp, a successful brewery owner who ended up killing himself in 1904 after the youngest of his 4 sons, Frederick, died. Now, a few years later, his wife also died of cancer in the house. Then, in 1922, William Lemp Jr. shot himself in the same room William Sr. killed himself. As if that weren't enough tragedy for one place, in 1949, Charles Lemp's 3rd son shot his dog in the basement of the house, then killed himself in his room. The same year, the house was sold and transformed into a boarding house, which reports of the hauntings began. According to Destination America, witnesses have experienced burning sensations and slamming doors. Today, the Lemp Mansion is a restaurant and inn, but also holds events. On Sunday night, the inn hosts a murder mystery dinner. Next up, we have the Villisca Axe Murder House in Villisca, Iowa. So on June 10th, 1912, Josiah and Sarah Moore were bludgeoned to death inside their home in Villisca, Iowa. Their 4 children and 2 friends who were spending the night were also killed, and to this day, the crime remains unsolved. Their home is considered one of the most haunted houses in the country, and guests are even drawn to it. People pay up to $400 to stay one night, and tours have been cut short by children's voices, falling lamps, moving ladders, and flying objects. And in 2014, a paranormal investigator stabbed himself after spending the night. Skeptics have been left believers. Next on our list is the Jean Harlow House in Los Angeles, California. Now, Los Angeles is one of the best destinations for haunted house hunting, and this Bavarian-style home in Beverly Hills has a particularly gruesome history. So, in 1930, it was home to the iconic actress Jean Harlow and her abusive husband, Paul Byrne, who shot himself in the head while standing in front of the mirror. Their butler is the one that discovered him and called MGM instead of the police. So there was tons of rumors that it actually wasn't suicide. Many suspected Byrne's ex-girlfriend because days after she jumped off a boat to her death. So Jean moved out after his death, but died only a few years later at the age of 26. But wait, it gets creepier, right? In 1963, celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring bought the home and lived there with his girlfriend Sharon Tate. Until she left him for Roman Polanski. Now, they were still friends and remained so until both of them were murdered by the Charles Manson cult. Tate was the same age as Harlow when she died. But back to when the couple lived in the Harlow house. Tate told several friends of creepy occurrences in the home and even mentioned it in interviews. For example, once, when she was asleep in the master bedroom alone, she saw a creepy little man. Her friends say she believed it was Paul Byrne's ghost. She was so freaked out when she saw the alleged ghost that she ran out of the room and then saw a hanging, shadowy corpse with its throat slit in the hallway. There are also stories about 2 other people dying in the swimming pool over the years. So definitely check that out and research it. Next is the S.K. Pierce Mansion in Gardner, Massachusetts. Now, Massachusetts has no shortage of haunted mansions. It seems that S.K. Pierce Victorian is one of the state's eeriest. The original occupant, Sylvester Pierce, had just started making his fortune in the furniture business when he built this home for himself. He also built it, obviously, for his son and his wife, Susan. As a man about town, he hosted many notable people in his 7,000 square foot home throughout the years, including President Coolidge, Betty Davis, and Norman Rockwell. Now, only a week after moving into the house, Susan fell ill and passed away from a mysterious bacterial disease. A year later, he remarried Ellen, a woman 30 years his junior, and had 2 more children. Years later, when both Sylvester and Ellen had passed away, his sons embarked on a fiery feud about the property as well as the furniture company. But the Great Depression swept in and made their choice easier since the company basically went bankrupt. The youngest son, Edward, was given control over the home when he turned it into a boarding house. It became a hotspot for illicit activities, including murders and sudden tragic deaths of several occupants. This is all, of course, according to local lore. As a result of these violent ends, guests have reported every kind of haunting imaginable, from visions of apparitions to flying objects, disembodied sounds, pressure temperature drops, and more. So definitely check that out. Again, that's the S.K. Pierce Mansion in Garner, Massachusetts. Next is the Mudhouse Mansion in Fairfield, Ohio. Located in Fairfield County, Ohio, until recently, the Mud Mansion has had a bad reputation. Nobody can seem to agree on when it was built, but it dates back sometimes between the 1840s and 1900s. And unlike other abandoned mansions on the list, you sadly can no longer visit it, as the home was demolished in 2015 after not being occupied since the 1930s. The last resident, or at least legally speaking, was Lulu Hartman Mast, and the current owner of the property is her relative, Jeannie Mast. Now, because there's so little information about who lived here and when, and because abandoned places tend to ignite the darkest of imagination, there are tons of legends around alleged atrocities occurring and consequent hauntings. But all the sources don't seem to be very credible. And that's all I know about that one. The next is 455A Sackett Street in Brooklyn, New York. Now, you never hear much about haunted apartments as haunted houses, which is strange, considering that apartments have had much more turnover, and therefore, higher likely of something or someone evil having lived there before you moved in, right? Not only that, usually apartments, unless they're apartment buildings built for apartment buildings, most apartments were houses, the whole houses, right? But anyway, in any case, with 455A Sackett Street in Brooklyn, one woman who grew up there writes about her first-hand experiences, including unexplained fires, seriously bad energy, family tragedies, personal sufferings, and here's the kicker: a body of a child discovered in the wall after several suspicious sightings of a similar-looking shadow child in the mirror. You can read her full story, and I'll put the link down in the description on Ghost Stories. Well, yourghoststories.com, I believe it is. But it's crazy, right? Next, we have the Hotel Monte Vista in Flagstaff, Arizona. Now, the Hotel Monte Vista has had numerous paranormal guests that they can't get rid of. The hotel, which opened as the Community Hotel in 1927 and named after the townspeople who helped raise the funds for its construction. It has a history of an underground opium dens, speakeasies, and gambling. Today, the hotel is known for the paranormal activity that haunts over some of the rooms and halls. Guests who have stayed in room 220 have experienced the TV changing channels, all on its own accord, and some have said that they feel cold hands touching them in their sleep. There's also reportedly a phantom bellboy who knocks on the doors and announces, "Room service!" But when the guests go to the door, there's no one there. that happened in our hotel, the one I worked at up in Alaska. We wouldn't get room service, but there would be knocks on the door. And, like, nobody, you know, all the employees lived usually on the third, we call it the basement. And just randomly throughout the day, you would hear knocks on the door like it's a maid. You know, you're waiting to hear room service. Or, well, we don't say room service, but, you know, we say, what the hell did we say? I don't know. I usually said front desk because I'm a front desk person. But anyway. So yeah, when the guests get to the door, there's no one there. One of the more popular and possibly more disturbing encounters is the sound of an infant crying in the basement. If you go to the hotel website, it says staff have found themselves running upstairs to escape the sounds of the cries. Though the sound very real to those who hear them, there has been no information that has explained the phenomenon. Which is wild, right? To me, it sounds wild, anyway. Like, why would... I mean, something had to happen. If there is residual haunting of an infant crying, or residual sounds of an infant crying, there's had to have something happen there. But maybe it was hushed up. I mean, if it was an opium den, obviously, you know, they're not going to talk much about what went on there. But crazy. Very crazy. Next one is, of course, the Myrtle Plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana. Rumored to be one of the top of the burial ground is the Myrtle Plantation in Louisiana, which is the home to at least 12 different ghosts. Built in 1796, the ghost stories center around the tale of the enslaved woman named Chloe, who had her ear chopped off after she was reportedly caught eavesdropping. Seeking revenge, Chloe killed 2 of her master's daughters by poisoning a birthday cake. She was then hanged by her fellow enslaved people, and today is reportedly seen wandering the plantation with a turban on to conceal her ear. So you can go to, of course, if you never heard of the plantations, definitely a lot of activity caught there. And if you want, you can go for the night, stay for $175 a night. Might be more now with the vid, you know, how everything's gone up because of that. The next one, of course, is Hotel Cecil in Los Angeles, California. Now, most of you have heard of this one as well. There has been numerous documentaries done about it. A lot of paranormal investigators have been there. So let's go ahead and get into it. More cursed than haunted, downtown's LA Hotel Cecil got such a bad rap that it actually changed its name to Stay on Main. If you're a true crime and paranormal superfan, you have already heard of it, most likely. So where to begin? So many bad things have happened here. There's literally an entire Wikipedia page dedicated to its violent history. The first recorded death is by suicide in 1931, followed by a long string of similar deaths in 1932, 34, 37, 38, 39, and 40. At some point in the 30s, one man was pinned to the exterior wall by a truck. A woman murdered her newborn in the building in 1944, and the pattern of suicides continued into the 1960s. Now, in 1962, a woman jumped from the 9th floor window and landed on a pedestrian, killing them both. It's worth noting that 2 of the women who died by suicide apparently jumped while their husbands were asleep in the room. In 1964, Tenant Goldie Osgood was brutally murdered, a crime which remained unsolved. Next, in the 1980s, the infamous serial killer Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker as some of you may know him as, stayed at the hotel, and in the 1990s, Austrian serial killer Jack Underwood stayed there as well. Other weird things happened, but the weirdest is definitely the disappearance and death of 21-year-old traveler Alyssa Lamb. A few weeks after Lamb went missing, her body was discovered in the rooftop water tank after visitors and tenants complained about a funky taste. They later found odd footage of her in the elevator from the night she disappeared. It's difficult to make out what she's doing. It looks like she's either playing hide and seek with someone outside the elevator, or she's frightened and attempting to hide from someone. But the doors won't seem to shut. Now, authorities ruled the death accidental drowning, but because you need a key to access the roof, many suspect foul play. Plus, there's a lot more information about that death that is very weird. Not gonna lie. I don't know. What do you guys think? Well, I'm gonna leave it off there for now. Hopefully you find this interesting, and I hope you like this podcast, and thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it. I appreciate each and every one of you. You guys are awesome. What would you like to hear? I am thinking about making, doing some podcasts that only maybe are 20 minutes long. I mean, I know I've cut down on the 2-hour ones, obviously. It's very hard since I've moved to New York to find the times, good times of really doing podcasts, because even though where I'm set up in the bedroom, I don't want to disturb my son and daughter-in-law and the baby, obviously, especially if she's taking a nap, because their bedroom's right next to mine. So I don't want to disturb them, obviously, right? And so I'm trying to figure it out still, but I'm thinking about doing shorter podcasts, but like of different cases, like, you know, sightings of a cryptid or sightings of a UFO, little short ones. Or do you rather me do the longer ones? I mean, I could still do the longer ones, that's no big deal, but give me your feedback on it. I would love to hear from you. And as always, again, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for sharing, liking, subbing, following, doing what you do. You guys are amazing. You really